Hi everyone, I'm here today with William Anderson. He is the editor of the new book, Selected Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder, and he is an expert on all things Wilder. I'm so glad you could join us today, Bill.
Thanks, Pam. It's great to be here.
I thought we'd start by talking about Selected Letters, your book. What can you tell my students about the focus of this book and how you approached this enormous project?
Well, after I wrote Laura Ingalls Wilder, a biography, more than 20 years ago, I realized that there were so many letters of Wilder's, and most famous authors and public figures eventually have a collection of their letters published. And I felt this is something on the back burner that would be fun to do and give readers the whole letter collection rather than excerpts that I used and uncovered for the biography. So I had a file folder for each year, starting with 1894, where I would just place the letters or photocopies that I found for that particular year. And that just kept expanding over the years because people would share letters that they had. And obviously I used all the letters that are at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library, and they just kept flowing in over the years because Wilder wrote thousands of letters to her fans, and the letters that she wrote to her daughter Rose are largely at the Hoover. So I had this bulging file of all these letters, and I would once in a while skim through them, and then as I found internal references and data that pertained to the letter, I would place that in the file folder. So essentially the research was done on the book, and finally the time seemed ripe to finally do the Selected Letters of Laura Ingalls Wilder.
What new insights will students find in this collection of letters?
I think that they will meet the Laura Ingalls Wilder who became an adult, a businesswoman, a country journalist, a mother, a wife, and a renowned children's author. In essence, since she did not keep diaries or journals, we would love that if she had done this, if her in her adult life, this is the closest we can get in her own words to knowing the kind of person that she was when she lived in Missouri.
Could you describe for students what happened to a lot of that personal correspondence that everyone is craving but no one has been able to recover? And could you explain why that is and how that happened?
The gaps.
The gaps.
In the introduction to this book, I felt I needed to share the story as I have uncovered it through research and hearing accounts from old timers about the clearing out of the Ingalls home, for instance. And large amounts of the correspondence that Laura would have sent back to the family in South Dakota just went up in thin air, because when the Ingalls home was cleared out in 1946, there was a truck pulled up to the house, and out of the second floor window where all their family belongings were stored in one room, it was a flurry of papers, books, magazines, Mary Ingalls Braille and embossed print library, old quilts, old clothes, old household items that nobody wanted in the 40s because it reminded them of hard times. And those things were taken to the town dump. So I am sure that we lost a huge amount of valuable material in that manner. Not more than a month or so later, Carrie Ingalls Swansea's home in Keystone was dealt with in the same way. These people had no survivors, no interested relatives who would cherish that type of thing. It's quite a sad story. And then in Rocky Ridge farmhouse in February of 1957, after Laura Ingalls Wilder died there, her daughter Rose, who was not only bereaved but exhausted from the long duty that she had given her mother when she was sick in her last illness, Rose was overwhelmed with the contents of that house. And I know that Rose destroyed whatever she readily found as far as correspondence that she sent home to her parents up the chimney that we see in the picture behind you into the winter sky. And then Rose must have done a purge in her home in Danbury, Connecticut as well. Not really systematic. She had her mind on other things, but there are some missing gaps which we would dearly love to fill, but they're simply not there.
They're not there. And I think that's really important because I hear from people all the time saying, where are Laura Ingalls Wilder's letters to Rose? Or where are her diaries? Where are her journals? And I don't think the journals probably ever existed, but the letters we've lost because at the time no one really realized how important they might be to literary scholarship in the future.
And there is this interesting question. If Rose did not want to be associated with the writing of her mother's books or children's books in general, why didn't she do a complete purge of the evidence? And I always say, yes, it's too bad that things were lost, but we're very lucky that a lot remains. And particularly the years 1936 through 1939, I was able to include in the collection of letters. And they tell us a great deal about the literary collaboration of Laura and Rose. So yes, it's too bad that a lot was lost, but we're very lucky that we have what we do.
And I think your book will give readers a sense of Wilder's more personal voice. And also, you're going to read a section from a letter for us that shows us Laura Ingalls Wilder as a businesswoman and author.
I'll do that. And it's interesting that when the work on this book was finished in December of 2015, 4 or 5 new letters came to my attention. And since the book has been published, more have been offered to me, photocopies and so on. And I pleaded with my editor, can we please squeeze in some of these letters that she wrote to a librarian in Kansas, and particularly the one I'm going to share now deals with Laura's writing process. And she said very little about how she worked. We can assume, we know she wrote in the 50/50 school tablets, but this letter seems to illuminate a little bit about her author process and indicates to me that she knew what she was doing. She said, I had no intention of writing anymore, and she's referring to the first book, Little House in the Big Woods, but children clamored for more stories, and Harper's insisted. So I've gone on from one book to the next until I've completed the longhand copy of the 7th. There is still one more to do in the series, and I promise myself that will be the last of my writing. I do my writing in a little room in a corner between my bedroom and the living room. It is a very small room with a window to the west and one to the south looking out into the big trees around the house. The room is filled with my desk and a table, couch, and a small bookcase. It is usually a mess with papers and books and manuscripts scattered around. I love that passage for several reasons. It shows that Laura Ingalls Wilder went through what other writers do. Their offices are a mess, awash with papers. And also, when we visit the Rocky Ridge farmhouse, the little writing room looks exactly as she described it, and this is in 1940. She went on to say, I write whenever I can snatch time from housework, telephone, callers, Mr. Wilder, and Ben, the bulldog. I may have written you that I do all my own work in the old-fashioned way mostly, and the house has 10 rooms. The way I work is a mixture of remembering, inspiration, and just plain plugging. While I'm working at housework, I study about whatever I'm writing. Sometimes I can't sleep for trying to place the right word in the right place. And again, I will wake with a perfectly turned phrase in my mind to be remembered and written down the next day. And that is an author who is very familiar with the writer's craft. And I thought that was a very important letter.
I think that's an amazing letter because it also tells us something about how she let she trusted her subconscious to work on a story when maybe she was exhausted and she had tried everything she could, and then she let it rest and would wake up the next morning and have that perfect phrase.
And she also would wake up in the middle of the night and there would be a perfectly arranged sentence in her head. So she'd tiptoe into that little room and turn the lamp on, and she'd write into the night. And sometimes Al Manzo would find her sound asleep on that couch in her writing office that she mentioned. And that also is a very literary type experience that we who write have often.
And I think what's lovely too about this passage is that while it shows us Wilder's an author, it also shows us Lauren Goes Wilder as a woman who is dealing with her craft. And so we get a really personal voice, a personal glimpse into her working process. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. It was a plum letter, and it came along just in time to be included in this book.
Thank you, Bill. This has been really illuminating.
It's always good to speak with you about Wilder.
Oh, thank you, Bill. We're going to be back for part 2 with William Anderson, so stay tuned.